pulling a tray of biscuits out of the oven when my phone rang. It was my son-in-law's number, which was strange because he never called me directly. In 3 years of marriage to my daughter, the man had maybe called me twice, once to ask what kind of flowers she liked for their anniversary, once to tell me she'd been in a minor car accident and was okay. I set the tray down and answered. "It's Sylvie." Her voice was so thin I almost didn't recognize it. Not my son-in-law at all, my daughter calling from his phone. "Mom, I need you. Don't tell anyone. Just come. Don't tell anyone. Just come." I didn't ask questions. I grabbed my keys off the hook by the back door and left the biscuits on the counter to go cold. She hadn't told me where she was exactly, just that she was at the gas station off Route 12, the one near the highway entrance with the broken sign that had been broken for as long as I could remember. I drove 12 minutes feeling like I was driving through water, everything slow and thick and wrong. She was sitting on the curb behind the building, out of sight from the road. When I got out of the car and saw her, I stopped walking for a moment. Her left eye was swollen half soot. There was dried blood along her hairline. She was holding one arm against her ribs the way you do when breathing hurts. I got down on the pavement next to her. I didn't say anything. Not at first. I just put my arms around her as carefully as I could and let her cry. After a while, she said. She told him I was cheating. She showed him fake messages. She said if he didn't handle it, she would. She met her mother-in-law. My daughter's voice, when she said it, had no anger in it. Just exhaustion. Like she'd already used all her anger up somewhere else and had nothing left. He didn't believe her, she said. He told her she was wrong. And then she told him that a woman like me, she actually said that a woman like me didn't deserve what he'd given her, that I'd only married him to get access to the family money, that my mother raised me that way. I felt something go still inside me. She said, "You raised me to be a grifter, Mom." My daughter looked at me then, her one good eye wet and red. She said, "You deserved whatever happened to me." I am 63 years old. I taught 3rd grade for 27 years. I raised 2 children by myself after my husband passed of a heart attack when the kids were 9 and 6. I never took a dime from anyone that wasn't mine, never asked for help I hadn't earned, and I have worked every day of my adult life with my head up and my hands clean. For a woman I had met exactly 4 times to say, in front of her own son, that I had raised my daughter to be a con artist, that I had somehow engineered this marriage from the moment my daughter was a child, I didn't have words for it right away. I sat there on the pavement behind that gas station, and I breathed through it. Then I said, "Can you walk to the car?" She could, just barely. I drove her to the emergency room at Mercy General. I told the intake nurse that my daughter had fallen down the stairs. I know how that sounds. I know exactly how it sounds. But Sylvie grabbed my wrist in the waiting room and said, "Not yet, Mom. Please. I need to think." And I had learned, in 63 years of living, that some battles you don't rush. The ER doctor, a quiet woman about my age with close-cropped gray hair, examined Sylvie thoroughly and told us she had 2 cracked ribs, a mild concussion, and soft tissue damage around her eye socket. Nothing that required surgery. Everything that required rest and time. While Sylvie was getting her ribs wrapped, I stepped into the hallway and called my brother. His name is Walter. He is 68 years old, retired from the county sheriff's department after 31 years, and he is the steadiest person I have ever known. When our mother was dying and I was falling apart, Walter was the one who drove 6 hours to sit beside her bed while I slept. When my husband died and I didn't know how I was going to make the mortgage payment, Walter was the one who quietly arranged things so the kids never knew how close we came to losing the house. He doesn't say much, but when I call him, he answers. I told him what I knew. I kept my voice flat and factual the way he had taught me years ago when things were bad. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "How is she?" "Cracked ribs. Concussion. She'll recover." And him. I thought about my son-in-law, about the 3 years I had watched him with my daughter, the way he looked at her when she came into a room, the way he always made sure she had a full glass of water before she went to sleep, the way he'd cried quietly at their wedding when she walked down the aisle and thought no one was watching. I thought about whether a man who loved a woman like that could really have done this. I don't think it was him, I said. Walter was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. Stay with her. Don't go anywhere near the house. I'll make some calls. Walter. I know, he said. The right way, I promise. Sylvie slept that night in my guest room, in the bed that used to be hers when she was a teenager. I sat in the hallway outside the door for a long time, the way I used to when she was small and sick with fever, just listening to her breathe. The next morning, she told me everything. Her mother-in-law, a woman named Constance, who had made clear from the first Christmas dinner that she considered my daughter an interloper, had been building this case for months. Constance came for money, old money, the kind that made people strange, the kind that made them believe their bloodline was something to protect. My son-in-law's family had a sizable estate outside Asheville, a house his grandfather had built, land that had been in the family for 4 generations, and Constance had decided somewhere along the way that my daughter was after it. She hired someone, Sylvie said, a private investigator. For months, she had someone following me, photographing me. When they couldn't find anything, they made something. The messages she showed him were fake. I don't know how she got them to look real. Does your husband know they were fake? He does now. He figured it out the same night. Something in the metadata, I don't know exactly. He called me 100 times. I couldn't answer. I had to get out of there. Where is he now? He's at his parents' house. He confronted his mother. She told him he was too emotional to think straight. His father just kept saying it was a misunderstanding. I looked at my daughter's face. The swelling had gone down a little overnight. She could open her eye more, but there was something else in her expression that I hadn't seen before, a kind of careful calculation, like she was measuring something. The investigator left a file, she said. One of the folders was in the house. I took it before I left. I have it in my bag. I looked at her for a long moment. Sylvie, was there anything in that file that wasn't you? She almost smiled. There was a lot in that file that wasn't me. Walter arrived Thursday afternoon in his gray pickup truck. He sat at my kitchen table and went through the folder methodically, page by page, in that careful way he has, the way that always made me trust him completely. He had brought a yellow legal pad and a mechanical pencil. He took notes. I made coffee. I stayed out of his way. After about an hour, he looked up. This investigator didn't work alone, he said. There's an invoice here from a firm I recognize. They mostly do insurance fraud work, but they've had some issues with evidence fabrication in the past. Nothing prosecuted, but there were complaints. Can that be used? Depends on how it's used. He tapped the pencil against the legal pad. The fake messages. If we can prove fabrication, that's potentially criminal. Fraud, defamation, depending on how they distributed them. And if the investigator knowingly created false documents, they lose their license, minimum. What about what happened to Sylvie? Walter set the pencil down. He looked at me the way he used to look at me when we were kids, and I wanted to do something that would get us in trouble. That, he said carefully, requires a conversation with an attorney. A good one. And it requires Sylvie to be willing to make a statement. I'm willing, said my daughter from the doorway. Neither of us had heard her come downstairs. She was still in the oversized sweatshirt she'd borrowed from me, her dark hair pushed behind her ears, her bruised eyes still yellowish at the edges. But she was standing straight. I've been willing. I was just waiting until I had something to stand on. Walter looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded, once, slowly. All right, he said. Then let's get to work. What followed was not fast. I want to be clear about that, because this is a story about patience as much as it is about justice, and I think people sometimes imagine that the right thing happens quickly once you decide to fight for it. It doesn't. It takes time. It takes money you weren't planning to spend. It takes phone calls that go nowhere, and documents that arrive late, and moments in the middle of the night when you sit in the dark and wonder if you are doing the right thing. We found an attorney through a woman I'd taught with for 15 years, whose daughter worked in family law. The attorney, a sharp, quiet man in his early 50s, who wore the same gray blazer every time I saw him and charged more per hour than I made in a day of teaching, reviewed everything Sylvie had brought and agreed that the case had merit. Meanwhile, my son-in-law had hired his own attorney. He had left his parents' house the same night he confronted his mother and was staying at a hotel downtown. He and Sylvie spoke by phone twice in the first week. Long, difficult conversations that I didn't listen to and didn't ask about afterward. That was their marriage. That was between them. What I focused on was everything else. Walter had made contact, through old channels I didn't ask about, with a former colleague who had worked digital forensics for the county. This colleague, a retired detective named Henderson, who I never met in person, examined the fabricated messages and produced a technical analysis that documented precisely and in language a court could understand how they had been created. The metadata had been altered. The originating account was traced to an IP address that was not my daughter's. The account itself had been created 4 months before Constance presented the messages to her son. That finding changed everything. Constance's attorney called ours 3 weeks after Henderson's report was shared. The call was brief and the terms proposed were modest: an apology, some financial arrangement, confidentiality on all sides. Our attorney relayed this information to Sylvie in a tone that suggested she might want to think carefully before deciding. Sylvie didn't think long. "No," she said. "I want it on the record. I want her on the record." I don't know that I would have had that kind of courage at 31. I know for certain I didn't. But my daughter sat across from our attorney in that office that smelled like old books and carpet cleaner, with her chin up and her hands folded on the table. And she said no to the easy way out with more composure than I've managed in most of my best moments. The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday in March. I drove Sylvie to the attorney's office and waited in the lobby with a thermos of coffee and a library book I did not read a single page of. My brother sat beside me for the first hour, then went to get us both sandwiches from the deli across the street and came back. We sat together the way we used to sit in waiting rooms when we were young, close enough to feel the other person there, not saying much. "You're doing the right thing," he said at one point, not looking up from his phone. "I know," I said. "She's doing the right thing. I know that too." He nodded and went back to his phone. The deposition lasted 4 hours. When Sylvie came out, she looked wrung out in the way that honest effort leaves you, depleted, but not hollow. There's a difference. She let me hug her in the lobby, which she doesn't always do. She held on for longer than usual. "How did it go?" I asked. "She cried," Sylvie said. "At the end, she actually cried." I thought about what to say to that. Did it help? "Not even a little," my daughter said. And then, for the first time in months, she laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised out of her, but it was real, and it was hers, and I held on to it like it was something I could carry. The case was settled out of court 5 weeks later. I am not permitted to disclose the financial terms, and I keep that agreement. What I can say is that Constance's attorney communicated, in a letter our attorney received on a Wednesday afternoon, that his client accepted full responsibility for the fabricated evidence and was prepared to acknowledge, in writing, that no basis existed for any of the allegations she had made against my daughter or against me. Against me. I had not known until that letter that our attorney had included my name explicitly in the claims that Constance's assertions about how I had raised my daughter constituted defamation. He had added it quietly, months before, and hadn't mentioned it because he didn't want me to feel like the case was about me. It wasn't. But he had included it anyway, because he was thorough and because he thought it was right. When he told me that over the phone, I had to sit down. I'm not a person who cries easily. I taught 3rd grade for 27 years. You learn to keep your face steady when you need to. But I sat at my kitchen table that Wednesday afternoon and I let myself cry, quietly, without anyone watching, for about 5 minutes. And then I got up and started dinner. Sylvie and her husband are still together. I want to say that simply and let it be simple, because it is, and it isn't, and they are the only 2 people who know which it is from day to day. What I can say is that I have seen him look at her the same way he always did, and I have seen her let him, and I have decided that is enough information for a mother to have. Constance and her husband relocated to their condo in Florida. I do not know if they speak to their son regularly. I do not ask. My brother came for Thanksgiving that year, same as always. He brought his famous sweet potato casserole, the one with the pecans on top, and we all ate too much and sat around too long and let the day stretch out in the comfortable way that good days do. Sylvie did the dishes even though I told her not to. Her husband dried. I watched them from the kitchen doorway just for a moment and thought about how a life is mostly made up of ordinary things. Biscuits going cold on a counter, a phone ringing at the wrong time, a daughter on a curb who needed someone to come. I came, that's the part I'll carry. Walter found me later on the back porch, both of us with our coats on because November in North Carolina doesn't care how warm it is inside. You okay? He asked. Better than okay, I said. He looked out at the yard, the oak leaves piled up against the fence. She's going to be all right, you know. I know. You both are. I looked at my brother, 68 years old, thick gray hair, the same steady eyes he's had his whole life. And I thought about every waiting room and every difficult phone call and every time he had shown up, when I needed him without being asked. I know that too, I said. We stayed out there a while longer, not saying much. The kind of quiet that means everything is said. The kind of quiet that only comes when the hard part is finally, honestly, over. I think about that Wednesday afternoon a lot, sitting at my kitchen table, coat still on, phone in my hand after the attorney called, 5 minutes of crying, then I got up and started dinner. That's the part that stays with me most. Not the deposition, not the settlement letter, not even Constance's name on a document admitting she'd lied. Just that moment of getting up. There's something I've come to believe, not because anyone taught it to me in a classroom, but because I've lived long enough to watch it prove itself over and over. The choices people make don't disappear. They accumulate. Constance spent months building something false, hiring someone to follow my daughter, manufacturing messages, constructing an entire case out of nothing, and every one of those choices added weight to something she would eventually have to carry. She thought she was protecting something. What she was actually doing was building her own reckoning, brick by brick, and she did it so carefully and thoroughly that when it came back to her, there was no arguing with it. That's not fate. That's not luck. That's just how things work when you pay attention long enough to see the whole arc. My daughter knew something I didn't fully understand until I watched her in that attorney's office. Sylvie had every reason to take the first offer. The quiet apology, the modest check, the chance to put it behind her and move on. Most people would have, I might have, at her age, but she understood something that took me years longer to learn, that the truth is only useful if you're willing to let it be seen. Keeping it private to spare everyone's feelings isn't wisdom. It's just a different kind of silence. She chose to put it on the record, and that choice required a kind of clear-headedness that I admired then and admire more now, the ability to think past the immediate discomfort and see what actually needed to happen. And Walter, my brother, has never been someone who makes a lot of noise about doing the right thing. He just does it. He showed up, sat at my kitchen table, opened a folder, picked up a pencil, and got to work. 31 years in law enforcement had taught him that the difference between justice and noise is usually patience and the willingness to work through the slow, undramatic middle part that nobody sees. He didn't promise me fast. He promised me right. There is a difference, and he has always known it. What I hope anyone takes from this, if they take anything at all, is that those 3 things held us together through every hard week of it. Doing what was honest, even when the dishonest path was easier and right there in front of us. Thinking clearly when emotion wanted to take over and make things worse. And staying in it when staying in it was exhausting and expensive and uncertain. None of those things are dramatic. You don't feel them happening in real time. You only see them when you look back from the other side and realize they were the only reason you made it through. My daughter is going to be all right. I've known that since the night she stood in the doorway of my kitchen in an oversized sweatshirt and said, plainly and without drama, that she was willing to make a statement. A woman who can do that, who can be that hurt and that clear-eyed at the same time, is going to be all right no matter what comes next. I got up and started dinner. That's enough. That's always been enough.